sneeze. Hello and welcome to 5 at Phoenix. So if you are joining us live this evening, my name's Zoe. I'm Zoe from Phoenix Life and Wellbeing Coaching, and you are tuning in to 5 at Phoenix. So this is our live session every week. Every month we have a different topic. This month our topic is on managing your emotions, and this week I'm joined by Stuart Middleton. So Stuart has brought with him 5 questions on that topic, and 5 questions that I have not seen. Stuart, do you want to introduce yourself and say who you are, and just tell us a little bit about the foundation?
Well, my name's Stuart. I'm soon to be 46, father of triplets. Set up the Dan Rhodes Foundation probably about 3 or 4 years ago now. The aim is to raise awareness of mental health issues. Best friend Dan took his life probably about 7 years ago now. So it kind of came off the back of that. But I've also struggled with depression and things. So it seemed like a good area to spend my time in.
Thank you. So what we'll do for people who want to find out a little bit more about the foundation, we'll put some links into the comments, and we'll be able to share this out. So if you want to find out a little bit more about the foundation and what the foundation does and who it supports, we'll put the links in for you to be able to find that. So Stuart, 5 questions for me. I'm intrigued. I am intrigued as to what you're bringing this evening. Do you want to go ahead with your first question?
The first one, men can generally be quite closed off when it comes to managing their emotions, which can obviously have implications on their mental health. If somebody wanted to start opening up, what would you recommend for how they could go about it?
So are you thinking of opening up to a family member or friend, or more to looking for sort of a trained professional?
Either. Probably a good place to start, because everyone's going to do it slightly differently, aren't they?
Yeah. I think there are lots of organizations out there now. I think we're talking about it a lot more, but I think there's also a lot more people talking about it. So we need those support places there to be able to support people. I think if you're in a place where you're ready now to open up, then I think people are more open to hearing and listening and understanding than perhaps I think we think they are. I think sometimes we close off because we think people don't want to hear it, or they're not going to understand it. And I think from my experience and from people that I have spoken to, people have quite often been surprised that when they have opened up to people, how supportive, understanding people have been. So I think it's just about being open and honest. And I think sometimes it's very difficult, isn't it, to and this may be something that you've experienced. Sometimes it's very difficult to put into words what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. And so I know this came up in a different conversation, when you don't understand what you're feeling, and it's then very difficult to be able to explain that to somebody else, let alone get somebody else to understand it. But I think the willingness from people who want to support and who want to be able to understand and be able to support people is probably there more than people think that it is. If does that make sense? Is that
I think
is that in line with the question that you were asking?
Yeah, things have definitely changed since. I remember the first time I went to the doctors about it, I got told that I should try losing a bit of weight and that would probably help. And I think we've come a long way since then. That's quite a long time ago now, and there are more people talking about it. So I think it is easier for people to start. It can be quite difficult for people to broach that conversation, but equally I think, you know, what you said about people being more willing to listen now, you know, is a good point. So yes, you did.
It's a big first step, though, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And
It's a big first step. If it's not something that you've opened up about before, it's a big first step to make. And I think there's almost sort of 3 channels of support, isn't there? There's your friends and family members. There's more sort of the different support organisations, foundations like yourselves, charities, Mind, the Samaritans, the more, you know, the bigger organisations. And then you've got that first point of call, like a GP, to go and get that help and advice from. So there's almost 3 different channels there for people to choose from on what type of support people want. I think the stigma around it is starting to change, but that's going to take some time for people to move past that based on past experiences. I think that's difficult. But I think there are channels there for people to choose what type of support that they want, and then make that decision of where it's best for them to take that step into.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is a lot easier than it used to be, but equally the most difficult part of it will always be the same, which is admitting that there is an issue, and then to actually doing something. You know, because talking, like with most things, talking about it is great, but until you actually take some action out of talking about it, things don't generally get any better.
Yeah, and I think talking is often the first step, but it's that willingness to take the step that comes after that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Because all talk and no action don't ultimately lead to much, does it?
Yeah. No, but I think the both of those steps are really, really big steps to take. They can be small first steps, but I think for people who are experiencing it, they feel like very big steps. But I think for family members, it's steps that family members and friends want them to take. So it's almost like you've got people encouraging you to take those steps forward. So that's always, you know, not everybody has that, but for people who do have that, I think that's always encouraging, isn't it? That quite often when you are ready to take that first step, quite often there's people, family and friends there that are ready to support you to do that.
Yeah, the support's always important.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge now, isn't it? There are more organizations out there, there's more awareness out there, but there's also a bigger demand.
Yeah, particularly
so it's that. Yeah, very much so.
Right, you ready for question 2?
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
Right, move on to question 2 then. When you're having a hard time, one of the things that you can struggle with is not wanting to burden your partner, partly because you're kind of trying to shoulder the weight yourself. Do you have any tips on how somebody can get around that?
That's a tough one. And from the conversations that I've had, I think this is something that men experience and men feel perhaps more than women, because of that, the role that quite often men play, and the role that men feel that they should be playing, and being the stronger one, and the stereotypes of the masculinity, and that it feels for a lot of people like a weakness in having to rely on their partner. Whereas often what the partner will say is, they would do exactly the same for me, and this is a partnership, and this is how it's supposed to work. And, you know, certainly for couples that are married, they say, you know, we said in sickness and in health, and this is what couples and relationships and partnerships are supposed to do. We're supposed to support each other. But I think that's part of, I think I do hear, especially from men, that they worry about being the burden, that they worry about how much that puts on the partner. But I think that's for both men and women. I think, but you know, again, having worked and having spoken to people who are the partner, they just want to help. They just want to be able to, they want to carry part of that burden. They want to be able to feel like they're sharing sharing and being able to support. So I think sometimes when people don't open up and they don't share with their partner, it almost adds, that's what adds to the burden quite often, is that it's the not knowing and the not understanding and not being able to help. Whereas actually a lot of the partners who I've spoken to, men and women, they want to be able to feel like they're helping. They want to be able to feel like they're supporting their partner and helping to share that burden. So sometimes when they feel like they've been shut out, that almost adds to the problem, as opposed to the person, their partner, sitting down with them and saying, this is how I feel, this is how you can help me, this is what I need from you. And so I think sometimes just that very open and honest communication of, this is what I need, this is how I need you to help me, or this is how I want you to be able to help me. And just having that dialogue about, okay, that, you know, when it gets too much, I need you to talk to me and tell me, so that there's that reassurance that you have that open and honest communication. But I think it's a fear of being a burden, which isn't always reality. Sometimes that partner, a lot of the time, that partner wants to be able to share the burden and feel like they're doing something to support, rather than that actually being part of the problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that tie in with your experiences?
Yeah, I think your perception of the reaction is never quite what the reaction actually turns out to be, is it? You know, you have an idea of what you think somebody's going to say or how they're going to react to a situation, and very rarely is that actually what happens. You know, so I think that's the biggest thing you've got to get past. You know, it's all your perception of the situation that's making you the burden, not the other person's. You know, so it's all about how you're reacting to it, as opposed to how they are. You know, but I think it's just the thought of that draws you to that conclusion that, you know, you're better off being quiet because you don't want to add any more pressure onto them. You know, when all you're doing is actually making two more problems, because you're making more of a problem for yourself, and they're more likely to pick up that there is a problem because you're not saying anything.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that the person who's experiencing the problem is analyzing it in the problem, if that makes sense. So, you know, if you are if you're struggling with depression, or you're struggling with anxiety, the way you think about it, your perception is going to be almost informed or influenced by that anxious or depressed state. So the person who your partner isn't in that state. So they're not going to perceive the situation in the same way that you perceive the situation, because they're not you and they're not experiencing what you're experiencing. They're in a different place. And so their perception is going to be different. And so I think, you know, what you said about doubling the problem is that you're doubling it for yourself, because you're not opening yourself up to the potential support that's there, but it's also allowing that other person to be part of the solution. And I think that's the communication for a lot of people is that most partners want to be part of the solution. They're not part of the problem. But they do want to be part of the solution. And so that communication of telling people what you need from them, what support do you need, and that's on different days, but keeping that communication open and continuous will help with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. Good question, though.
There's better to come. The next one. Social media can be a bit of a minefield for managing your emotions, especially given that it's driven by things like likes, and, you know, it's very much playing to certain sides of people's emotions. Do you have any tips on how people can best deal with that? Because obviously we're all in it to some degree now. you know, and it's one of those things
Yeah.
that it's not going to go away. So people probably need to find a better way of dealing with it.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, social media is such a challenging one, isn't it? Because there's a lot of positivity out there. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of help. There's a lot of advice out there, and then there's also elements of it that run through it that can be incredibly toxic and unhelpful. So I think it's almost two elements. There's the element of who are you following, who are you linked with, who are you connected with on social media. The timeline when you're scrolling through that timeline, what emotions does it evoke? Does it help you to feel positive or motivated or inspired? Is it giving you information? Is it giving you help and support? If it's not doing that, then can you unfollow or mute certain accounts so that you don't get those responses from it? But also just checking in with how you feel when you log into social media. So I know that my tolerance levels sometimes are a lot higher than others. So I know that sometimes I log in and certain things will frustrate or annoy me, that I know that on other days I probably would just keep scrolling and not think twice about it. So I think there's that element of, what emotions are you feeling when you log into social media? So are you going into social, are you logging into social media to help you to feel better? And is it going to help you to feel better? Or would you be better off maybe phoning a friend or going for a walk or spending time with, your children or your partner? Would that help you to feel better rather than turning to social media? I think the emotions that it evokes, very different for different people. Mine tends to be more annoyance of some of the things that are said. But I think, social media is not the real world. You can unfollow or mute people on social media and they don't get removed from the universe. It's really just a platform. And I think there's an element that says we need to be respectful that people can post on their accounts what they want to post within reason. But that doesn't mean we have to follow them. That doesn't mean that we have to stay connected to their social media account because we're connected to them in the real world. And I think there's that. Yeah, certainly I have conversations with people and people are very nervous about unfollowing or muting people because they know them in the real world, or spending less time on social media because they're not keeping up with what people are doing. I think that's part of the challenge, isn't it? Is if we feel like we're missing out if we're not on it, but when we are on it, it doesn't feel great. So I think I like, there's lots of social media accounts like that. Dan's foundation one for one, which is motivational, inspirational. It's nice to quotes and stories of what's happening. But again, depends on who you follow. But my rule of thumb is 3 eye rolls and then you're gone, which is a bit ruthless. But I don't want to be following people that are not a positive influence. I don't, I wouldn't invite them to come and spend half an hour and talk to me in that way, or talk in that way in my home. So why would I allow it into my headspace through a timeline? Which is, and that's how I do it. But it's 3 eye rolls, and then it's like, okay, you're gonna have to go. You can talk that talk, but I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
So that's how I manage it. But I think it's the emotional state that you're in when you log into it. Is that really going to help? And then also it's the emotional state that you feel when you're in it. Is it helpful? Is it positive? And if not, step away from it or clean it up, filter out what's not helpful so that you don't see it.
Yeah, I must admit, I try and have regular calls of people just to get rid of anybody that I don't feel is adding something to my life. If they're just detracting from it, then
Yeah.
it's not worth having them in there. And the other thing I do tend to try and do is to try and limit the time I'm on there. You know, it's a fairly simple
Yeah.
thing to try and do. I think it's something that everybody's particularly unaware of, because especially with having it on your phone, you can just pick it up and start scrolling without even realizing you're doing it. So I think trying to
Yeah.
get an awareness of what you're actually
Yeah.
doing and then trying to limit that is also quite important.
Yeah, I think it's become quite a mindless activity, hasn't it? You know, the number of times that I've caught myself watching something and I've noticed that I've looked down and I'm scrolling and I'm not even looking. I'm not even paying any attention to what I'm looking at. It's just that mindless activity. But I think that's, you know, the cleaning it up, you know, are they adding value is a great question to ask. You know, am I following this account because it adds value, whatever that looks like for you? But if it's not adding value, why would you follow it? And if you're following it because it's a popular account and other people are following it, well, that's up to them. They might feel different when they see that account, but if it's not adding value for you, then you got to let it go.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a lot easier than removing and distancing yourself with real people. Yeah, definitely.
I don't know. I've never had a problem with that with real people. I seem to get rid of them when I need to.
Well, you can have a conversation then, I guess, can't you?
Yeah, you know, or you can just stop being involved with them, can't you? It's far easier sometimes.
Yeah.
Right, the next one.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more. Yeah, go for it.
Negative self-talk is often a problem for people, and that can drive your emotions from there. What's the best way of dealing with that, and how can you try and make it more positive internal dialogue? It's something I know I've often struggled with. You know, because I'm my own worst critic.
Doing it now. I think we all have part of us that has that negative self-talk, and I think we all have it. And I think an inner critic is useful to an extent. Otherwise, we would walk around, you know, and let ego would drive everything, wouldn't it? So I think inner critics are helpful, but inner critics need to know when to shut up and take a seat back and let you get on with what you're doing. And I think sometimes we allow our inner critic to have a voice when it's not needed. So I think the first thing is to recognize what that inner talk is, and call it out, write it down, you know, write down what it is, write down when it happens, write down the language that you use, you know, the things that you say to yourself and when you say it, and then start to think about what would you like to say to yourself instead. What would you like to replace that with? You know, I always say to people that, you know, when we're children, we have parents, teachers, coaches, adults who question when we say things out loud that are negative, or that negative self-talk is out loud, or we say I can't, or we try and talk ourselves out of things. We have people around us who question that, don't they? They jump in and say, well, you haven't tried it yet, and why don't you just give it a go, and I'll help you with this, and just make a start. And they'll give you that encouraging, positive talk that helps balance that out. And then when we get to our adult stages, we don't have that person who does that. We don't get challenged on it quite as much. So it gives that inner critic, it gives that self-talk more opportunity to speak without being challenged. So I think we then have to take responsibility. We have to take ownership of making that change. So I think identify what it is you're saying and when you're saying it, and identify what you want to say instead. What's your positive self-talk? What would your inner cheerleader say to you instead? What would your parents say to you if they were there and they heard you saying something like that? And then just start by being more conscious of it. Start by recognizing when you say the negative chatter, and be really conscious of replacing it loudly with that positive self-talk. It's a learned behavior. It's a learned response, which means we can learn a different way. We can learn to say something different. But it's a habit, isn't it? It's a habit of saying certain things to ourselves. And sometimes we don't even pay attention to the fact that we're saying it. So the other thing that people can do is to tell people around them, if you catch me saying this, I need you to pull me up on it. And kids are great at spotting, if you hear dad say this, or if you hear mum say this, you need to jump up and tell me. Kids are great for that. But it is, use the support network around you to say, if you hear me say this, I need you to, give me a little bit of a nudge and remind me that that's not true. Because quite often the inner critic, that negative self-talk, isn't true. We know it's not true. We've just been saying it to ourselves for so long, we don't think about it anymore. So I think call it out, work out what it is you want to replace it with, and then just start to be really aware, really conscious of when you hear yourself say the negative, make sure that you repeat back, go, that's not true, and keep repeating the positive. And eventually that will become more the habit, and a much more positive habit to have, rather than that inner critic. But the critic has its place because it keeps us in check. Otherwise, our ego, if we had only ever had an inner cheerleader, our egos would go a little wild, I think. So the inner critic has its place, but we need to make sure that the inner critic knows when to take a seat and let us get on with this.
Yeah, I think two things I've always found useful has been writing it down, because it's easier to pick apart if you put it down on paper, and thinking about whether you would say, if you were saying, would you say the same thing to your best friend? If you wouldn't, then you need to reframe it. They're two things that have always kind of come to my mind.
Oh, I think that the interesting question there as well is, if somebody said that to you, how defensive would you get? If somebody said the things that we say to ourselves, if somebody stood in front of us and said that, we would be horrified, and we would probably jump to our own defense quite quickly. So it's interesting, isn't it? We take our own self-critic to be more informed than other people. So it is an interesting one, but I think writing it down helps, because once it's written on paper, it's out of your head, isn't it? It's a lot more clear, and it becomes more logical rather than emotional.
Definitely, writing things down helps with a lot of things. I found, journaling and doing daily gratitude and things like that all kind of help with trying to reframe your perspective on things. If you're looking for the positives in things, then
very much.
It's easier to reframe it, isn't it, than if you're just listening to what goes on in your own head.
Which isn't always helpful. And you'll know that. I mean, I know you know that I'm a huge advocate for starting the day and finishing the day with positives. So, your morning gratitudes, things that you appreciate, and then finishing the day with 3 wins, 3 successes from your day. Because it's very easy, isn't it, to sit at the end of the day and pull the day apart and criticize everything that you didn't do as well as you wanted to. But it means that we lose out on all of the good things that have happened, or the good things that we've done. So chopping and tailing the day with positives is a great way to help with that positive reframe. Good question.
Right,
is that 4? Or was
that's 4?
We still got one more.
One more to go.
Okay.
The final one is loneliness. Loneliness is a big problem currently. We're all more connected than ever, but people are feeling more alone, particularly, as we go through this pandemic and lockdown and all the associated problems with it. Have you got any suggestions on how people can manage it?
Ooh, it is an increasing problem, and I think it's not. People talk about loneliness for older people, and I don't think it's a generation thing at all. I think there's a lot of people who feel isolated, feel lonely, regardless of their situation. So I think it's been really difficult, hasn't it? Because the level of connection in terms of, Zoom calls and Teams calls and being able to connect via video has increased. That's more the norm now than it was a few months ago. But if it doesn't feel like a genuine connection, that doesn't stop the feeling of loneliness, because it's that emotion, isn't it? It's not necessarily always going to be a logical solution, because it's how we feel. So it's what is it? It's that, I think it's that genuine connection that people are looking for, whether it's in person or video calls. And I think there's a bit of that video fatigue, isn't there? There's kind of the fatigue of doing everything online at the moment, and I think that doesn't help. I think it's looking at when have you not. I think look at where it has worked. Look at where you have felt those connections, where you have been able to have activities where you felt connected to people, or times in your life where you haven't felt lonely. What was in your world then? It's a lot easier for us to look at where it has worked and then start to bring that back in. So I think that's, for me, would be the starting place of looking at times where it hasn't felt like that, and what was different. What's the difference that makes the difference? What did you do then that you're not doing now that you might be able to do again? And if you did something then but you can't do it now because of restrictions and things like that, can you do something that is similar that might help to feel the same way? So I think that's probably one thing. There are lots of places out there, aren't there, that are trying to connect people, like-minded people, to be able to help build those friendships and connections online. You've got websites like Meetup, where you can look for people with similar interests, similar hobbies, to be able, and a lot of that's moved online. So there's things like that can help. I think it also depends on, that introvert extrovert. So I think for people who are introverts, who like their own space, who don't like the bigger, they prefer smaller groups, it's being able to find those places where they can feel that energy and that connection. And extroverts has been very difficult because of the lockdown, because they're not out seeing people, they're not out in big groups of people. So there's kind of pros and cons for both sides. But I think that would be the first thing, is to look at, when you haven't felt this way, what was different? What were you doing that was different? What can you bring that back in now? And if you can't bring that back in now, what can you do that's similar that might also help? And then look to see, everything or so much more has moved online now. So can you find these places with people that you would like to connect with? Where are your like-minded people that you can go and have conversations with? And there's lots of things that haven't been online that have had to move online. But as we move out of this lockdown and we start to move back into things, there will be, walking groups and, people who like the similar kinds of music, and where you can search to find people who are like-minded, whatever interests you've got, of those shared interests. But I think it's easier now because everything's online, but you still need to find that genuine connection. And I think that's probably the first question, is what does that mean to me? What does that genuine connection mean? What am I looking for? And I think also just the simple things like checking in with neighbours and checking in with people. If you know that you're living around people who might be isolated, who might be finding this a challenge, of that sort of, that just everyday kindness, isn't it, really, of checking in on people, and the odd message WhatsApp message to check in on somebody you haven't checked in on for a little while. They're all little things that can go a long way with people. Was there something in particular, when you look at this, are there sort of things that you have in mind that would be helpful to people? There's a real lag at the moment. So I don't know if you caught what I just said. No, I think the connection might have slightly. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can't. You just dropped out.
Right, okay. So there was a little bit of a lag there, but I wasn't sure how much you caught.
I kept getting the start of sentences, but not the end.
Right, okay. So I'm not sure whether or not that would have picked up or not. So I can have a look at that. What was the last bit you heard?
Looking at what has worked in the past and what you can do to either do the same thing or get something close to it, given where we are at the moment.
Yeah, and I won't repeat what I said again in case it did pick up. But I think that's the challenge at the moment, is looking at where you have had those times where it's not felt like that, and what was different. It's the difference that makes the difference, isn't it? And I think there will be some things at the moment that we can do, and there'll be some things that we can't, but we might be able to adapt that in a different way that might help. So it's a difficult one though, because this isn't something new, is it? This isn't something that's necessarily connected to COVID, but it is definitely something that people are feeling a lot more because of COVID.
Yeah, I think it's just exacerbated the problem, hasn't it? That the problem was there before, but because you've now got a lack of movement and personal interaction with people, it's that's causing, kind of bringing it to the fore, rather than you being able to put it off with other things.
Yeah, and if you work from home and you live alone and you can't go out and you can't meet more than one person, that doesn't help. It's removing a lot of the options that people would have had and that a lot of people would have turned to. And I think that is the challenge at the moment. And it's good to see lots of businesses that are offering the option for people who feel like that, to be able to go in and work, for people to be able to go in and go into the workplace and sit with colleagues and be able to do that. And it's good that I'm seeing and hearing more businesses that are asking that question of, you can work, we would like you to work from home because it's safer. But actually, if that is going to have an impact on your health and well-being, then there will be places in work for you to come in and work and socialize and meet and mix and work with other people. So I think, and people need to ask. I've had a call with a client in the last couple of weeks who was saying the same thing. They were finding it really difficult working from home, and after we talked it through, she rang her boss the next morning and said, look, this is how I feel, what are my options? And she's now working in the office 3 days a week and working at home for 2, but she didn't know that was an option until she asked. So I think sometimes we, again, it's what you were mentioning earlier, really, isn't it? It's that assumption and perception that it's not an option, whereas actually sometimes when we talk it through, people are more understanding and they want to be supportive than we assume that they will be, or that we give them credit for. So I think it's that challenge, isn't it? If it is something that you're struggling with, to have that conversation with your boss and say, actually, I'm finding this really tough. What can I do? And in a similar way to the conversations that we were talking about to have with your partner, we need to be as open with people in work as well. If we're struggling, we need to let them know we're struggling and ask them what they can do, or ask them for what we think they can do that will help us. And I think it's that open communication goes both ways. There's lots of help and support out there. We need to, I think, is it a British thing of asking for help? I'm not sure, but it's certainly, I think probably people are more helpful and supportive a lot of the time. Not always, sadly, but I think a lot of the time people want to be able to help and support. So yeah. 5 good questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you haven't thrown in any extras. I think you might actually be the first person who's not thrown in a sneaky extra.
Well, I followed the instructions.
I like a guest that follows instructions. You can come on again.
Yeah, well, it'd be good at one point.
We'll put the link in. Thank you. Well, no, they were great, thought-provoking questions. It's made me think a little bit. So they're good, thought-provoking questions, and hopefully it's some value in there for people who are watching and who watch back. We'll put the link in for Dan's foundation, so people can come and find you and find out more about what you do. But thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
Good to have you on. And we will see you again soon. So we will have another guest next week. So we have another 2 guests on this topic for November. So look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thanks again, Stuart.
Cheers.
Thank you.